You're about to discover the 4 essential things you need to know about a Mekong River cruise. I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruising tips for travelers. I'm currently on board the CroisiEurope Indochine II, cruising down the Mekong. And I'm going to share with you 4 things that I've learned that I think you absolutely need to know if you're going on a Mekong River cruise, starting with this one. First of all, where exactly does a Mekong River cruise go? The Mekong River is an enormous river. It's over 3,000 miles long and passes through 6 countries: China, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Most of the cruises tend to go between Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam and Siem Reap in Cambodia. And the cruises tend to be around about 400 miles of the river, so about 600 kilometers long, passing through Vietnam and Cambodia. The cruises, they go all year round. So unlike in Europe where it has a very specific season, you can go all year round on the Mekong. And the temperatures are pretty consistent, so they're about a low of about 20 degrees up to a high of about 34 degrees. The cruises, they tend to be around about 8 nights long, about 9 days long. But most people, and I strongly recommend you do this, will add a pre and a post to the cruise, so you get time to spend time in Ho Chi Minh City, and very importantly, Siem Reap. So you do want to spend time to actually go up to the Angkor Wat temples. The second really key thing that I think you need to know is what are the experiences that you're going to have on a Mekong River cruise. And I think there are probably 4 critical experiences. The first of which is you're basically going to cruise through Vietnam and Cambodia and get a real sense and a feel for the sights, the sounds of these 2 amazing countries. Plus, you're also going to cruise on some very important waterways. So as you cruise through, you're going to see various villages, floating villages. You're going to get a chance to see the diversity of the vegetation. And then you're going to go through those 2 really important water areas. The first of which is known as the Cho Gao Canal. The other really magnificent and important waterway you go through is known as the Tonle Sap Lake. This is the biggest freshwater lake in Asia. The second really important experience, I believe, is you get to see 3 major cities or centers. The first of which is Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh City, of course, used to be called Saigon, although the locals still actually call it Saigon. And it's a really buzzing, busy place. There are something like 7 million scooters. It's crazy busy with scooters zooming all around. Now, unlike most Mekong lines, CroisiEurope docks in Ho Chi Minh Center, which makes exploring and excursions really easy. You get to see some really interesting remnants of the French time when it was a French colony, and you get to see beautiful French buildings like the Notre Dame, the old Saigon post office, the Opera House, and the very beautiful town hall. And then you also get to, which I think was one of the most interesting excursions, learn a bit about the Vietnamese War, and you go out of Ho Chi Minh City to the Gu Chi tunnels. This is a network of something like 200 miles of underground tunnels where the Viet Cong waged a big part of their war against the South Vietnamese, of course, sponsored by the Americans. It's a fascinating place. You could actually go down some of the tunnels if you want to. The next critical place, which is a place I hadn't been to before, was Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia. Again, a very busy city, very dynamic city. Some beautiful things you see in Phnom Penh. The most magnificent of all was the Royal Palace. I was just blown away when I walked around the corner and saw this place. Absolutely magnificent. In the grounds as well is the Silver Pagoda, where the king will go and worship. Really magnificent. There's also a great museum, the National Museum of Cambodia, which is chock full of different statues from different eras of Cambodian history. You also get to learn about the pretty dark times in Cambodia, and this is the Khmer Rouge period in the 1970s, when almost 2 million Cambodians either were executed or died of starvation. You get to go to prison S21. It's now a genocide museum, and there you get to see and learn about the torture and the massacre of locals. The third critical center is Siem Reap. Siem Reap used to be centuries ago the capital of Cambodia, but now it's really the gateway to the famous Angkor Wat temples. And not only is Angkor Wat here, there are some other key places like the Ta Prohm Temple and the Angkor Thom, which is the old royal palace. These, of course, are now ruins. They're huge, big structures, and Angkor Wat is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and really worth it. Then the third amazing experience is you get to go to little villages, out of the way, really rural places in both Vietnam and Cambodia. and we went out to lots of small villages. So you get to see how people live, you get to see the markets, you get to see the produce, how they grow crops, and really interestingly, you get to see the traditional ways that they still make a lot of products. So we went to some incredible places. So for example, in Vietnam, we went to a bee farm where they then produce all sorts of honey products. So we got a chance to see how they cultivated the bees, and then we got to taste some of the products and actually hear some local singing. We also went in Vietnam to a factory which produces rice products. So we saw how they made rice crackers, we saw how they made puffed rice and made those into candies. We also saw how they made rice wine, which is kind of surreal because they put cobras and scorpions in, but very interesting. Once we were in Cambodia, we went to a few other places. So for example, we went to the Sensors de Angkor, which is perfume area where they make candles and soap, and the Artisans de Angkor where they have wood and stonecraft. We went to loads of other places like pottery places, loads of different places that we saw traditional crafts and traditional ways of making things. We also got to see the local markets where people head out every day and they buy their fish and their meat and their frogs and their turtles and all the various bits and pieces that form part of the cuisine. The fourth amazing experience is you get to see some amazing temples. Probably my favorite was the Tay An Pagoda, and we saw this in Cha Doc in Vietnam. This is a magnificent building, and inside there was just such ornate and detailed statues, and of course you had the altar and the Buddhas. Another memorable temple that we went to was Wat Kampong Tralach Le at Kampong Tralach. This was in Cambodia, and what made it remarkable, it is very much a local village temple, but we also got to travel there on traditional ox carts, so that made it particularly memorable. The third thing that I think you need to know is how do you experience this Mekong River cruise? What are the ships like? Well, it's actually a pretty luxurious way to travel through what is still a pretty rugged and remote part of the world where there's not necessarily lots of infrastructure. The ships themselves are smaller generally than you would have in European river cruises. So for example, the Indochine II from CroisiEurope that I was cruising on, that only had 31 cabins, 62 guests. The ships themselves are a very different shape to the European river cruise. They tend to be a little bit higher and shorter because they're not constrained by the bridges that you would have in Europe. What do you actually have on the ships? Well, most of the ships on the Mekong that you see, including the Indochine, do have a sort of a colonial look and feel to them. Despite their small size, they still have a fair range of facilities. You'll have, for example, on the Indochine, we had a sun deck, which actually had a plunge pool, great spaces to sit. It actually had some equipment you could work out if you wanted to out there, some cardio equipment. You had on the sun deck level a bar area where you'd have your briefing, entertainment, and just a place to relax. Up here on the sun deck was also where you had the Wi-Fi. Then you had the cabins, and then down on the lower deck, you had the restaurant, which for breakfast was a buffet. For lunch was also a buffet, but you also had a cooking station making something special dish of the day. Dinner was a sit-down meal, and it was a multi-course meal with a starter, soup, a choice of either meat, fish, or chicken every day, and then a dessert. As you cruise through what is still a pretty remote and rugged part of the world, you will certainly appreciate the fact that you have a way of traveling through this area in comfort and luxury. So what is the experience that you can expect on board one of these ships? So that's the fourth key thing I think you need to know. Well, first of all, what you can expect is largely all-inclusive fares. So you'll find with river cruising on the Mekong, similar to Europe, a lot of things are bundled into the fares. So I'll give you again the example of my CroisiEurope experience. So accommodation was included, all meals were included, wine, beer, and soft drink with lunch and dinner was included. All excursions are included, so there's an excursion at every single stop, and that includes a local guide who travels with you the whole way through the cruise. So in Vietnam, we had a Vietnamese guide that was with us the whole way in Vietnam, and then we had a local guide from Cambodia that was with us the whole way in Cambodia for our very specific group. Wi-Fi is also included, of course, on the rivers. It's relatively patchy, so on the Indochine II, it was available up on the sun deck area and in the lounge, but again, of course, it varied based on where you were on the river. Also included in the fare is some onboard entertainment, so we had some dance troupes, for example, came on board. There was movies every night, and there was occasional talks. So all of that is included within the fare. So what's not included? Well, gratuities, which are optional, are not included. Of course, if you want to have a massage, that's not included. And things like the airfare to the cruise, transfers, those kind of costs are not included. Of course, you can work with your travel agent to build a whole package together. And of course, drinks out of mealtime are not included within the fare. You can also expect a high degree of regional immersion. Obviously, as I mentioned, you have the local guides, so you spend a lot of time with them, really understanding the history, the culture of the region, and you have time to build a relationship with your Vietnamese guide and your Cambodian guide. You also have some of that entertainment on board, and also sometimes when you're out on an excursion, you'll have entertainment. As I mentioned, the excursions are very much focused on getting you into the region, into the small villages, and to interact with local people, local markets, and craftspeople. The food is very much linked to the region. So in Vietnam, you'll have more Vietnamese dishes. In Cambodia, more Cambodian dishes. So the menu every night at lunchtime was very much focused on food from the region. So you get a real chance to sample that. Service levels are very high because, again, the ships are small. There's not a lot of passengers, but the crew numbers are quite high. So, for example, on Indochine II, there were 62 guests, but 32 crews. So that's a 2-to-1 crew ratio. So a very high level of service. Mekong River Cruise, it's been on my wish list for a very long time. I found an incredible experience. I really enjoyed my time on board CroisiEurope, and I can strongly recommend a Mekong River Cruise. It's an amazing way to see this part of the world. Remember, I have loads more videos with tips and advice about river cruising, ocean cruising, all types of cruising, so why don't you watch another one of those?